one of the things that emerges is to be able to achieve the objective of being net zero emissions by 2070, India needs to invest about $7 trillion in total, about $240 billion a year. Where do you propose that money comes from? Because the Global North talks, I met Geeta Gopinath of the International Monetary Fund. They're making promises. The World Bank is making promises, but it's not enough to meet the financing needs of a country like India.
Yeah, so I totally understand, and that's true. I think it's going to be, I think the other thing I think very important to think about is this is a transition. This is not energy conversion. It's going to take 20, 30 years. I don't think coal and oil and gas or the reduction globally it'll start reducing over time, but it's going away. And so I think the actual capital needs to come from three sources. One is direct government capital, but I would argue that it really should be more catalyst capital, where you're like the blended finance opportunities, where the government may be taking like a first risk, but actually co-opting more capital. I think you'll find a lot of interesting investors that would look at that. I think the other issue is taking things at scale. So renewables are at scale right now. There are issues that we talked about before, but actually a lot more capital can go to scale it up even more. We spent time with the steel industry in terms of decarbonizing the steel industry. So take hydrogen, right? One of the key sources of decarbonizing steel actually is the use of green hydrogen over time. And what I'm finding is that a lot of capital is going to that as well. I don't think we're going to get to the $7 trillion right away, but it's going to be incremental. The other thing I think, again, it's nascent days, but is to, again, use market forces. I mean, I think it's very important we make sure that government can play a catalyst role, philanthropic capital can play a catalyst role, but this is not about doing good, ultimately. It'll have a great positive result, but there has to be a commercial. Most capital in this world is fiduciary capital, which means you have to earn a risk-adjusted return. And so one of the other big opportunities, which we're doing quite a bit of work on, is the carbon markets. So think about this. Most companies in the US have talked about, or Europe have talked about net zero targets. I think in India that awareness is a little bit there, but maybe should be a lot more. Net zero targets. They're not probably going to get there with their current efforts. And so therefore they go around trying to buy these carbon credits in the voluntary markets, which have had their own issues. But think about if India could say, okay, or any of the South could say that, okay, we are going to be investing X amount to reduce our carbon intensity, whether it be new technologies, agriculture, or various areas, and that the reduction in emissions actually counts as a carbon credit for all these countries and companies that are saying net zero. If you think about the amount of countries and companies that have said net zero who are not going to meet their targets based on current trajectory, there's a huge amount of capital where they can just transfer it to places like India, get the credit for net zero, and you're going to get... So John Kerry had proposed a plan like this, I think, in Glasgow. I think it's getting some traction. So it's a big problem. I mean, capital formation in India, even if we didn't have a climate problem, capital formation for its growth needs is an issue. And so foreign investment has to play a role. As I advise CPP. In fact, we are one of Renew's biggest investors. We think that area is going to be a huge growth area. And we think it's going to be an area that we continue to look at to kind of put more capital, and other pension plans are as well. I don't have a silver bullet. It's not going to show up tomorrow, but over time I think it will. And I think we should not also underestimate how technology and innovation, ultimately technology and innovation is the core. It's the core issue. And that how technology innovation can drive costs down over time, bring in solutions which maybe people would have never thought about before, which could cost a lot less and don't need to cost $7 trillion. So, but right now I think more needs to happen on all fronts from a collective standpoint.